Peter B. Collins, News and Comment. It's Wednesday, a day that will be remembered by many people, December 18th, 2019. This is the day the House of Representatives is moving forward on impeachment of one Donald J. Trump. And as you know, and in the letter that Trump wrote to Pelosi yesterday that we'll dive into in just a moment, scratching our heads frequently as we refer to it, he argues that there have been people who wanted to impeach him even before he took the oath of office. And I confess I am one of those people, because I felt his corrupt intent was clear, and that his violation of the Emoluments Clause of the Constitution by owning the hotel leased from the federal government right down the street from the White House was a clear conflict of interest, and it should have been investigated. There have been attempts to sue him over his violation of emoluments, and then he proceeded to just build with obstruction of justice in the investigation into Comey's firing, and then into what became the Mueller investigation. And I believe Trump deserves this impeachment. I have quibbled with the Democratic strategies. As you know, I believe he became completely vulnerable to impeachment when Michael Cohen entered into the plea deal over the hush money payments to Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal. And it continues to fry me that the Democrats didn't include that in the impeachment process that we're seeing play out today. And so, in the early morning hours, I flipped on the TV, and they were fighting over the rules. And the rules were passed along a party line vote, which set up the schedule allowing 6 hours of debate on the two articles of impeachment. And as I speak to you, it's about 2:30 Pacific time here on Impeachment Day, and they are proceeding. We expect around 4 p.m. for that debate to be wrapped up, and then they will move to the vote, which will occur on party lines. We've seen in the rules vote, 2 Democrats have defected, but only 2, and no Republicans defected from the cult of loyalty to their president. Nancy Pelosi opened the session this morning wearing black. She said, "Today, as Speaker of the House, I solemnly and sadly open the debate on the impeachment of the President of the United States. Our founders' vision of a republic is under threat from actions from the White House. If we do not act now, we would be derelict in our duty. It is tragic that the President's reckless actions make impeachment necessary. He gave us no choice." And this has been her posture all along. He's going to make me do this. And I criticized Nancy Pelosi for her refusal to allow articles to be introduced by Al Green of Texas, Maxine Waters of California, and there were a number of others along the way, and she deflected them. And I do not share her view that the Ukraine kerfuffle is so easy for people to understand and such a clear violation of law and precedent. And that's why I've argued that the clear criminal behavior that's wrapped up nicely in a box with a Christmas bow on it, the Michael Cohen plea deal, is the more solid ground to be impeaching on. But my disagreements about timing and strategy do not undermine my position that this is a very impeachable president, and it is only the denial of his cult of followers and their use of his favorite tactic, projection. And it works. I got into a wrangle on Facebook last night with some pro-Trumpers. They're in complete denial. He didn't do anything wrong. This is an unfair process. He wasn't able to defend himself. He couldn't call any witnesses. And it's all bullshit. But they repeat it because they have no factual basis to challenge the testimony and the evidence that's been presented, as curtailed as it was by their own guy. And so Republicans and Trump supporters just refuse to acknowledge that Trump has obstructed this investigation by not allowing key employees at the White House and former employees to participate in the House's impeachment inquiry. And it amazes me that so many people can just blow right past that and say, well, it wasn't fair. Trump didn't get to call his witnesses, his lawyer. He was given the opportunity to make presentations to the House Judiciary Committee, and he refused. So he's playing a deadly cynical game. And I'm looking now at a printout of the bizarre letter that he sent to Speaker Pelosi yesterday. And it's basically just a compilation of the litany of complaints that he has used on Twitter at his routine mob rallies that he holds all over the country, including the one tonight in Battle Creek, Michigan. I'm sure Trump thought, yeah, Battle Creek. That's where the cereal wars were fought. And so he's going to go and, pick up some Rice Krispie energy. I don't understand that. But let me quote just a few passages from Trump's letter and respond. The articles of impeachment introduced by the House Judiciary Committee are not recognizable under any standard of constitutional theory, interpretation, or jurisprudence. They include no crimes, no misdemeanors, and no offenses whatsoever. You have cheapened the importance of the very ugly word, impeachment. Now, this is more of a little view into our stable genius's mental state, because he jams all this different stuff together. All right? You don't have to have a crime to impeach a president, but his loyal followers probably believe you do. And so he says things that he knows aren't true, but they have the ring of what Stephen Colbert once called truthiness. And there are plenty of gullible people with red MAGA hats who are willing to believe anything he says. And then to declare that the word impeachment is a very ugly word and it has been cheapened by this democratic process, I mean, that's just incoherent. So let's move along to page 2 of the letter. He said, even worse than offending the founding fathers, because he disputes that this is a constitutionally valid process. He says, you are offending Americans of faith by continually saying, I pray for the president, when you know this statement is not true unless it is meant in a negative sense. It is a terrible thing you are doing, but you will have to live with it, not I. Now, here is this deeply religious man. The evidence is clear with 3 wives and all kinds of chicks on the side. The man who panders to religious people in this country. And he believes that he is so devout that he can tell that Nancy Pelosi is lying when she says she prays for him. And this is bizarre because anybody who actually believes in the power of prayer doesn't believe that they can know what someone else's prayers are about, or what motivates them, or how they conduct those prayers. And I'm not personally a man of prayer. I know Nancy Pelosi is. I've interviewed her. I worked for her on a campaign. We're not best buddies. But I know a lot more about Nancy Pelosi, I would hazard to guess, than Donald Trump does. And I think she's quite sincere when she says she's been praying for him. And why he would want to dispute that notion in a letter that is this word salad of defense against the impeachment, it says more about him than about her. Next paragraph. Your first claim, abuse of power, is a completely disingenuous, meritless, and baseless invention of your imagination, says the guy who has flatly refused to allow his former chief of staff to testify about clear obstruction of justice ordered by the president in the Mueller investigation, interference, and the threats to fire St. Bob. And then, of course, he recites all the shit we've heard from him before about how the first call nobody's objected to and the second call with Zelensky at the end of July was perfect. And then he says that Zelensky, who, of course, needs Trump so badly that he cannot possibly risk offending him, he tries to say that Zelensky said that Trump did nothing wrong. Oh, and there's a passage here about Joe Biden when he squeezed the Ukrainian government to fire a prosecutor. But what Trump won't acknowledge is that the big difference is that Biden was not trying to get something to help him get reelected. And even if you accept the false premise of Trump's claim that the firing of the prosecutor was an attempt to take the pressure off the Burisma company where Hunter Biden served on the board, that's not a direct benefit to Joe Biden the way his attempt to embarrass Biden using Ukraine was so self-serving. There's also a claim in here that the president has the right of executive privilege. But he plays games with that because he has never formally asserted executive privilege. He's just told people not to honor subpoenas. And they have demurred. Now, one thing that I acknowledged at the beginning is that people like me have wanted to see Trump impeached from day one. And as I listened to Rush Limbaugh for a bit on the way into the studio this morning, he was bragging. He played a clip from himself. He loves self-referential stuff. From 2 days after the installation of Trump in January of 2017, and Limbaugh predicted that Democrats would ultimately impeach Trump. I don't think that that was a long shot prediction to make. And then in the middle of nowhere in this letter comes this. You are the ones interfering in America's elections. You are the ones subverting America's democracy. You are the ones obstructing justice. You are the ones bringing pain and suffering to our republic for your own selfish, personal, political, and partisan gain. I have never seen such projection. These are all of the things that he is guilty of. And his response is, I know you are, but what am I? And near the end of the letter, he writes, perhaps most insulting of all is your false display of solemnity. You apparently have so little respect for the American people that you expect them to believe that you're approaching this impeachment somberly, reservedly, and reluctantly. No intelligent person believes what you are saying. Since the moment I won the election, the Democrat Party has been possessed by capital I, impeachment, capital F, fever. There is no reticence. This is not a somber affair. Well, he's dead wrong about that. But it plays to his base. The people who are credulous, as I helped define that term last week, they are willing to believe just about anything he says. Like this, the White House issued a statement through the press secretary saying that Trump will be working all day and not watching the impeachment proceedings. But he's tweeting like a monster. Like this one. Such atrocious lies by the radical left do-nothing Democrats. This is an assault on America, an assault on the Republican Party. And as I mentioned, he'll take his act and maybe even read passages from that bizarre letter to Pelosi at the rally scheduled tonight in Battle Creek, Michigan. Interesting piece in today's New York Times, the byline, Cheryl Gay Stolberg. She got an interview with Pelosi over the last couple of days, and I think it's an excellent profile of her. As I've explained, I don't agree with all of her strategic calls, but I do respect her leadership, and she has kept a fractious Democratic caucus in the House pretty much in line, and she did do it her way. Again, I don't agree with doing it so late in the presidential cycle because it is seen as a prelude to trying to defeat Trump next year. And it's also always been difficult because we know that the fix is in the Senate. That trial will not be fair. And we covered that rigging angle yesterday with the comments, particularly from Mitch McConnell and good old Lindsey Graham. Kind of ironic piece also in the New York Times today by David Sanger, their Washington bureau chief. And with heavy irony, he notes that while the House was debating impeachment today, in a Senate committee, they were discussing a bill called Defending American Security from Kremlin Aggression Act of 2019, And the author is one Lindsey Graham, the senator from South Carolina. Now, he introduced that light years ago. That's actually 10 months ago. And things have shifted so much that Lindsey, in his excessive defense of the president, has a little egg on his pretty little face from supporting this measure. And he has to do this dance of making Putin seem like a son of a bitch while making Trump out to be St. Don. And I take some pleasure in watching them squirm in that manner. Also, my old friend Tom Campbell, the moderate California Republican. Full disclosure, I've known Tom since he went to Congress around 1990, and I worked on his campaign, the only Republican who I have ever provided my campaign services to, when he challenged Dianne Feinstein in 2000. And so while Tom and I don't agree on every issue, we have a great deal of mutual respect. And he published an op-ed that I've linked to in the show file for this podcast. It was in the Orange County Register. Campbell now teaches law and something else, I can't remember, at Chapman University, economics. That's in Southern California, in OC. And so he, as he always does, wrote a very thoughtful piece that does not drive you into a partisan frenzy. And he says, if I were in the House today, I would vote yes on one of the two articles of impeachment of President Trump. And he measures his support for these impeachment articles, only one, alongside his support for the 2 out of 4 articles of impeachment that were pressed against Bill Clinton. And Campbell writes, impeachment of a president should be rare. I thought Clinton had lost the capacity to lead when he admitted he had falsely testified under oath in a federal criminal grand jury and had induced others to submit false testimony under oath in a civil case. This demonstrated such disrespect for the rule of law that I decided Clinton could not be trusted to take care that the laws be faithfully executed as the Constitution required. The same conclusion applies to Trump. If the facts alleged are true, he cannot be trusted to carry out the laws passed by Congress and signed by him to deliver military aid to an ally under attack without delaying to request something personal in return. Unlike Clinton, Trump has not admitted the factual basis of these charges, nor has he offered a factual defense. Now, I don't agree with Tom when he says that he would support Article 1, but not Article 2, related to obstruction of Congress. He says on the second count, Trump has chosen to disrespect the House, but he should not be impeached for that alone. Well, I can disagree with Tom on that, but I've linked to his op-ed, and you're free to read it and come to your own conclusions. Every day I pause for a minute to thank the people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. People chip in $5, $10, $20 a month or sign up for our best deal, the $50 annual subscription. Today I want to thank Jason Ferguson, Janet Price, new subscriber Leanne O'Brien. Welcome, Leanne. I owe you a bonus book. Get in touch and let me know what you'd like. Also, Joey Perillo, the famous actor who survived many great motion pictures. He's based in Philadelphia. And I do appreciate each and every one of you. If you'd like to become a subscriber, it's pretty easy. It just takes a minute or two. You could even pause the podcast right now. As you traipse over to peterbcollins.com, find the menu tab, click on Become a Subscriber. You'll land on the sign-up page, and you can make a choice that's comfortable for you and your budget. And if you want to avoid PayPal, many people do, you can address your correspondence to my P.O. Box, number 150-660, San Rafael, California, zipper 94915. I'm a little surprised by this. A state judge in New York threw out the charges that had been brought by the District Attorney of Manhattan against Paul Manafort. And this was considered a safety lawsuit. The idea being that if Trump pardons Paul Manafort for the federal crimes that he has been convicted of, that he would not walk away scot-free. And Cyrus Vance, the DA, framed his charges in a way that he hoped would not be seen as double jeopardy. That means you can't be tried or convicted of the same crime more than once. But the Vance indictment was, aimed at other offenses that Manafort committed, but that were not specifically in the federal indictments that he was convicted under. So Manafort gets a pass on that one, and he's probably pretty relieved. Manafort went into a prison hospital recently, so he is experiencing some serious health issues while he's incarcerated. Over at the National Review, I've linked to their report on the FISA court judge who was hopping mad after the release of the Inspector General report that showed that the FBI was sloppy, careless, and mischaracterized the evidence against Carter Page when it took out and then renewed 3 additional times these 60 or no, I guess they're 45-day cycles in the I could be wrong about that, but that's what I remember in the FISA court. So the judge who is sitting over there right now at the FISA bench has ordered the FBI to come into court on January 10th and to explain why their standards were so lax, why the Carter Page filings were not updated by information that came in through the investigation they were running under the original court order. And as you know, I think this is a very serious issue, and we shouldn't have a FISA court in this country. We shouldn't have secret proceedings in a star chamber. But at this point, the best we can hope for is some reform. And conservative senator from Utah, Mike Lee, he's a Republican who I agree with little on, but he has a kind of a quirky streak where he's a constitutionalist. And like me, he does not see a place for the FISA court and has been calling for its reform for a long time. So I welcome support from both sides of the aisle for the critical mission of fixing the FISA court. And on the same vein, or in the same vein, the Inspector General who issued that report a week ago Monday, Mike Horowitz, testified before a Senate committee, and this was another effort to distract from what was going on in the House today, impeachment. Horowitz criticized how the FBI handled the former Trump campaign advisor Carter Page's investigation, asserting that agents used inaccurate information to obtain the FISA orders. Horowitz said he didn't see evidence of those problems infecting the rest of the FBI's investigation into whether the Trump campaign coordinated with Russia to influence the 2016 election. And this hearing is the second time Horowitz has discussed his assessment of the FBI's investigation into the Trump campaign in 2016, and his remarks offered fodder for both sides to validate their partisan views on Trump's relationship to Russia and whether there was so-called collusion. Horowitz also said that as the investigation went along, the Bureau included significant inaccuracies and omitted important information that it had discovered. He said, you've got agents talking with one another about why is Page even a subject anymore? So I do think that this has brought to light important defects in our covert government entities, not to be confused with the deep state. Both are real, but they are different. In France, the crippling nationwide strike continues as unions have shut down a lot of transportation, the railroads and the subway line in Paris, the metro. And the government is signaling that it wants to negotiate, but union leaders have vowed to continue their actions all the way into the new year, not pausing for some sort of ceasefire during the Christmas holidays. And it appears most French people are in support of this effort because at stake is their pension. And Emmanuel Macron has proposed consolidation of 42 different pension funds. I can imagine that that's a worthwhile goal, but most people think they'll take a pension haircut in the process of that reform, and they're bitterly opposed to it. Another issue of workplace problems is at the Googleplex in Silicon Valley. Last Friday, they fired the 5th person who had worked at Google in less than a month, who had participated over the past year in any kind of public criticism of Google. Now, as you know, the contract with the Pentagon that was ultimately awarded to Microsoft, and Amazon is suing, claiming that the process wasn't fair and that Trump intervened. Well, that whole effort led to a backlash among Google employees who took the "Don't Be Evil" slogan seriously. So the latest person to be fired is Catherine Spears, a 21-year-old security engineer, and it turns out a transsexual. And of the 5 people who have been fired, and Google says it has no connection to their workplace activism, but they were all workplace activists, and 3 of the 5 are transsexual. And that does raise questions about the real motivation by Google in dismissing these employees. So this is something that we'll continue to watch. And if you happen to work at Google and you would like to share information with yours truly, I promise you confidentiality, and you can communicate me via email. I do have a Gmail account, but I don't give that one out. Peter@peterbcollins.com will put you in touch. Well, Ed Snowden published a book called Permanent Record. You may be aware of that. And then the government sued, trying to deny him any payment for profits from the book. And in district court in Alexandria, Virginia, yesterday, Judge Liam O'Grady said that Ed Snowden has to cough up all the money he's made from Permanent Record. And it's because he had previously signed agreements when he worked at the CIA and the NSA, allowing those agencies to review disclosures before he made them public. Now, this is pretextual. We know that when approved former CIA officers, for example, want to publish a book, they might submit it, they might not. And depending on how much power they have, nothing happens. In other cases, people who are out of favor, who submit their books for pre-publication review, like Valerie Plame, they blacked out so much of her book it was almost unreadable. And we later learned the trivial nature of many of those redactions. So from what I understand on the inside, Ed Snowden got his publisher Macmillan to pay him up front before the book was published. And he presumably has collected enough on that. And I don't think that the Justice Department currently has any minions in Moscow who could drop by Ed Snowden's place and say, "Hey, we've come to collect that money." So I think it's pretty much a stalemate. But it's sad to see the government chasing Ed Snowden. He's already paid quite a price. And so has Chelsea Manning. Do you know that yesterday was her 32nd birthday? And she spent it like she did, I think, her 30th birthday and a few before that, locked up in a federal facility. This time, of course, she's being held in Alexandria, Virginia for bogus charges of contempt of court because she has refused to testify before the WikiLeaks grand jury. And from everything we know, that grand jury has wrapped up its work. And they're waiting for the British to respond to the extradition, and then, presumably, Assange will be brought to the United States, if he's still alive, and tried. And this sentence is so gratuitous. And to me, the biggest injustice is that we don't see any elected officials, Republican or Democrat, even Mike Lee, right, who stands up to the FISA court. He would never say anything about this travesty of justice visited on Chelsea Manning. Glenn Greenwald got a great interview with Evo Morales, the recently deposed president of Bolivia. And Morales really unloaded in the interview. He was asked about, was there any difference between Obama, Bush, and Trump? Here's a quote. "I doubt that there are differences between them, maybe in their form, but at the end of the day, there are no differences. They all speak of peace, but none speak of social justice or the independence of states, the dignity or identity of the people. So as far as I see, democracy in America deceives its people into voting, but neither the people nor the government rule. It is the transnational corporations who govern, whether it's the Democrats or Republicans. How does he get our number? All the way from Bolivia. He explained that shortly after he was elected, the U.S. ambassador dropped by and told him that his country could not have any relations with Iran or Cuba or Venezuela. Morales protested, "We are not a colony of the United States." He said one former head of state had warned him to watch out for the U.S., saying there are no coups in America because there are no American embassies there. And here's a powerful statement. He said that there have been multiple attempts to capture him in the weeks of violence that preceded the coup on November 11th. He said that members of his security team had been offered $50,000 to betray him. Multiple times, his presidential plane was diverted by the military in an attempt to take him to an Air Force base where he could be detained. Many of the country's military, including the leaders of the November coup, had received training at the infamous School of the Americas at Fort Benning, Georgia. Each time, Morales had been able to contact his supporters, who came out in thousands, storming the runway to prevent him from being captured. And he said that after the coup, when Mexico sent a plane to take him into exile, the Trump administration also sent a plane to pick him up. But he knew far better than to hop on board. "They'd take me to Guantanamo," he said. Interesting piece. You can find it, the video interview, at The Intercept today. Over at the Gray Zone Project, Max Blumenthal does a good expose on some of the missing parts in the resume of Pete Buttigieg, Mayor Pete of South Bend, running for president. And I have to say, Blumenthal does a great job of explaining how Tulsi Gabbard threw him off and exposed who he really is in the most recent debate that she was permitted to participate in. Blumenthal also discovers that Mayor Pete made an unusual trip to Somaliland in July of 2008, and he connects that to Mayor Pete's links to USAID. And in that respect, his traveling partner on the trip to Somaliland was a guy named Nathaniel Myers, who now works for USAID. He was a classmate of Mayor Pete at Harvard, and they seem to share a similar worldview. So there's a lot of detail in here, and I encourage you to check out the excellent reporting by Max Blumenthal. The link is in the show file at peterbcollins.com. I'm really impressed with a guy named Adriel Hampton. He's a political activist here in California, and he's pissed at Facebook because they allow political candidates to run ads that are untrue without any fact-checking or censorship. So Hampton has maintained his status. He has filed to run for governor of California in 2022. And because of that status, he can place ads on Facebook. And so he created one that is completely false, featuring footage of Mitch McConnell spliced together to make it appear that he's calling for Trump's impeachment. He placed it on Facebook. He boosted his post with a couple of $100, and only 1,000 people have seen it so far. But he is tweaking Facebook, showing them that people can run falsehoods with impunity. And I do have to say that part of this that most people don't recognize is that the FCC rules that govern broadcast television also permit candidates to lie in their political commercials without any sanction whatsoever. So I do understand that people are miffed at Facebook for doing this. I think Hampton is doing us all a service by continuing to place false ads there. But we have to look at the overall structure of our political messaging system before we encourage Facebook to censor these issues on its own recognizance, if you will. And finally today, I want to note that the Trump administration has issued a press release claiming that they are going to move forward with plans to allow states to import prescription drugs from Canada for the first time. Well, when you read the fine print, no major drugs like insulin drugs are included. This is a very limited and sketchy proposal that will not take effect immediately. And so it's just another misleading reality creation by the team in the White House these days. Thanks for listening to my daily news and comment podcast. You're free to share it all over the dang place. You'll find it on YouTube. And I remain Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling.